The world of Theron had changed forever. The skies were clear once more, the rivers flowed strong and steady, the fields began to bloom again, and the people walked through their cities not with fear but with purpose. Their eyes were open to possibilities that had seemed unimaginable only months before, and everywhere the presence of humans was felt, not as an occupation but as a promise kept, a hand extended. When all others had turned away, children laughed as they ran through the streets playing games taught by soldiers, their voices ringing across the plazas, while elders shared stories of the past and of the humans who had come to their aid. A new generation of Theroners grew up knowing that the stars were not indifferent, that somewhere out there were beings who could choose to listen and act, who could decide that mercy and courage were worth more than wealth or conquest. Humans themselves had grown attached to the world. They had saved the Deathworlders who had arrived, with fearsome reputations softened as they taught and built and protected alongside the people of Theron. They had seen despair transformed into hope and destruction transformed into life, and they too felt a bond that stretched beyond duty into friendship, respect, and pride for what they had accomplished together. The fleet that had once arrived with thunder now moved calmly above the world, a symbol of watchful guardianship, not domination. Festivals were held across Theron, celebrating the recovery and the new alliances. The people painted murals, honoring the humans. Their songs carried the story of survival and courage. And in every village and city, children carried flowers and gifts to the soldiers and engineers who had saved them. Monuments were erected not only for the humans, but for the unity of effort and the triumph of hope over abandonment. Of the great powers of the galaxy, who had once ignored the calls of Theron, now watched with quiet respect, if not awe. They saw a world transformed not by force, but by discipline, care, and resolve, and they could not deny the growing reputation of humanity as Deathworlders, whose mercy was matched only by their strength. Some whispered in council chambers of caution, others of alliances, yet all knew that the balance of power had shifted in subtle ways that could not be ignored. The people of Theron themselves walked freely through the rebuilt cities. They farmed the lands with confidence, they drank from clean rivers, they studied the lessons taught by humans and shared their own wisdom. In return there was laughter and music and commerce and play. A life that had once seemed impossible now felt ordinary, in the best sense, ordinary in the sense that survival had become thriving, that fear had become hope, and that cries that had gone unanswered for so long had finally been heard and answered. And as the sun set over the mountains, casting gold and fire across the plains, the humans looked to the horizon, knowing that their work was not complete, but also knowing that the world they had saved would endure, that the people of Theron would remember their choice to come when no one else would, that across the galaxy a new story had begun, one of courage, compassion, and the understanding that even in the coldest emptiness voices of need could find those willing to answer. Reen would never forget, and neither would humanity, for in answering the cries of a dying world, the Deathworlders had not only changed another civilization but had also changed themselves, forging bonds across the stars, a testament to the power of mercy, courage, and the simple act of listening when no one else would. The observer retreated to the shadowed corridor just beyond the council chamber, hearts still racing with the intensity of their failed warning eyes, scanning every corner and every reflection from the polished walls. The images of humans on the device burned in their mind. The council had laughed, but the proof had been undeniable. The scout recalled the reports from distant colonies, signals of destruction and chaos intercepted months before, each report more disturbing than the last. Yet each message had been filed away as overreaction or miscommunication, but the humans had a pattern, precise and relentless, each strike methodical, leaving no trace of mercy and no room for hesitation. The observer thought of the miners on Seven who had vanished without a trace, their transport vessels found empty, floating in orbit as if devoured by shadows. The images replayed in their mind over and over, humans emerging from the darkness, striking with tools that were crude in appearance, yet lethal in execution, their adaptability frightening in its simplicity. The observer clenched the device tighter, knowing that if the council had seen these images with true comprehension, they would have acted immediately, but instead they had chosen amusement and derision, as if humans were a child chasing bugs across a meadow, ignoring the sharp claws hidden in the soil. The observer moved to a communications hub, sending encrypted messages to allied systems describing the threat, urging caution, detailing the movements of humans across trade lanes and mining stations, hoping against hope that someone somewhere would listen and prepare. Humans were patient, they were not driven by emotion or politics, they were hunters and strategists. Born from struggle and survival, every failed colony and intercepted convoy was a lesson learned, every misstep catalogued and converted into advantage. The observer felt the weight of inevitability pressing against their chest, knowing that the first wave had already begun somewhere beyond sensor range, in the shadowed sectors of the galaxy, unseen and unstoppable. The council continued their debates above, oblivious to the silent storm building beneath their feet. The observer recalled conversations with other species who had encountered humans, fleeting encounters that left both fear and awe in their wake, stories of humans facing impossible odds and surviving against overwhelming forces, tales dismissed as folklore now revealed as warning signs ignored by arrogance. The observer returned to the device, projecting a new set of images highlighting humans, analyzing maps of council territory, marking patrols, and observing weak points in fleet defenses, each movement precise, each action calculated. And yet the council had laughed at the idea of strategy in human behavior. Each laugh echoing through the corridors now felt like a distant death knell. The observer paced the empty corridors, feeling time slip away, knowing that when the humans struck, the galaxy would have no preparation, no warning, no chance to plead their case. The observer remembered the words of the first survivor who had fled a human attack, describing the creatures not as monsters but as inevitable forces of nature, relentless and unyielding, every instinct honed to track and destroy. The observer pressed a hand against the wall, taking in the cold crystal glow, trying to steady a racing mind. The thought that no council in history had faced such a relentless predator filled them with dread and determination. For every second wasted, humans grew stronger and closer, and the council still slept in arrogance, still laughed and celebrated their achievements, oblivious to the storm that would soon consume them. The observer whispered a vow to survive, to warn, and to witness the reckoning that would follow, knowing that once humans arrived, the galaxy would never be the same. The remote mining colony on Chiron 7 lay bathed in the pale light of a distant sun, the dust swirling in the low gravity, creating ghostly patterns as miners moved through tunnels, unaware of the silent predators observing them from orbit. The colony had been chosen for its isolation, its lack of defense, and the abundance of valuable minerals. The observer had warned them, but the messages had been slow to arrive, and many dismissed them as paranoia. Yet sensors had begun picking up anomalies, small flickers on long-range scans, ships appearing briefly then vanishing, human ships designed to blend with space-like shadows slipping between asteroids unnoticed. The colony leader paced the command center, a network of consoles and holomaps, his face lined with worry. Signals from mining drones flickered, reporting slight interferences, strange readings, equipment malfunctions that made no sense. The observer stood beside him, explaining the patterns, detailing how humans adapted quickly, how they could strike with minimal force and maximum efficiency. The leader shook his head, disbelief etched into every movement, thinking it impossible that beings so seemingly primitive could challenge an entire council. Yet the first attack proved the warnings true. Alarms blared the moment the humans struck landing pods, silently touching down in the mining fields, moving faster than the eye could follow. The miners screamed, running through tunnels, barely escaping capture. Machines exploded in clouds of molten metal. Humans dismantled defense drones with precision, improvising weapons and tools scavenged from the colony itself. Nothing slowed them, no hesitation. The observer watched in silent horror, noting every strategy, every movement, committing it to memory, knowing this was only the beginning. Humans had no leader that could be identified, no signal that could be traced. They moved as one, yet each acted independently, adapting instantly to new obstacles. The colony's emergency lights cast long shadows across the tunnels, revealing glimpses of the intruders, their presence felt rather than seen in the whisper of air displaced, the subtle hum of a panel shorting out, the sharp metallic scent of fear and dust. The leader tried to organize a defense, rallying the miners to fight back, using their mining equipment as weapons. Yet the humans anticipated every move, turning even improvised defenses against them silently, efficiently. The observer activated emergency communications, sending a final warning to the council, detailing the attack, urging immediate action, sending coordinates and patterns. Yet the response was silence. The humans continued their methodical hunt, navigating the colony like predators in their own jungle, avoiding traps, disabling systems, capturing survivors to interrogate and use to further refine their tactics. The observer tracked each movement, cataloging strengths, weaknesses, predicting next steps, yet knowing prediction alone would not save the colony or the council elsewhere. Humans struck trade ships, silently removing entire crews, leaving the remains floating silently in space. The galaxy began to feel the first tremors of fear. The observer realized that this was no raid, no spontaneous attack. This was the beginning of an unrelenting campaign. Humans had already chosen their targets and learned how to exploit every weakness, and now the colony on Chiron 7 was a testament to their patience and skill. The survivors huddled in the deepest tunnels, whispering stories of hunters that never slept, and the observer knew the laughter of the council would be remembered as the cruelest mistake. The humans would not stop until the hunt was complete, and the galaxy understood the terror of underestimating a species born to survive and conquer. Beyond the smoldering ruins of Chiron 7, trade routes once bustling with commerce now carried an uneasy silence. Ships drifted between stations with crews, anxious and fearful of unseen predators. The observer monitored every channel, every transmission, noting patterns in human movements. They were clever, unpredictable, adapting to obstacles almost before they existed. Every route taken by merchants and council fleets now carried a hidden risk, every dock a potential ambush, every freighter a possible trap. The humans moved with patience, striking only when advantage was absolute and retreat guaranteed. The observer sent encrypted messages to allied colonies warning them to hide, to divert shipments, to scatter personnel, to reinforce defenses, but many ignored the advice, thinking humans incapable of strategic planning, thinking that Chiron 7 had been an isolated incident. Yet sensors picked up the first infiltrations. Small pods docked briefly, then vanished, cargo containers emptied or subtly altered by the humans, leaving no trace of their presence, only subtle differences in the layouts, markings, and sequences that could confuse automated systems. The observer studied each anomaly, knowing that each small disruption was a lesson learned by humans, catalogued for future strikes. Council officers continued their ceremonies and trade negotiations, unaware of the silent war unfolding across the galaxy. The observer moved from console to console, tracking shifts in supply chains and logistics, noting how humans bypassed entire fleets, how they adapted to patrol patterns, predicting movements with uncanny precision. One incident involved a convoy transporting rare minerals, a perfectly secure route calculated by council engineers. Yet humans intercepted the shipments, disabling communication arrays and rerouting drones, using the convoy itself to block senses. Before vanishing into a nearby asteroid belt, the crews reported nothing, only fear. The observer compiled these incidents, showing patterns of learning, adaptation, and relentless pursuit. Yet the council remained indifferent. The observer watched as messages went unanswered, waiting for confirmation of acknowledgement, hoping that at least one sector would act on the warnings. The humans struck silently on the fringes, intercepting isolated stations, capturing personnel, interrogating and using them to refine further strategies. The observer recorded every movement, every tactic, every innovation, noting how humans turned limitations into advantages, improvising weapons, tools, and devices from whatever they could find. The trade network became a chessboard, each shipment a piece moved by unseen hands, each fleet a pawn in a hunt. The observer realized that time was the humans' greatest ally, patience their most lethal weapon, and fear their constant companion. The council celebrated new treaties, welcomed dignitaries, and adjusted tariffs, unaware that humans observed everything, learning and preparing for strikes. No fleet formation, no patrol schedule could evade their attention. The observer moved to send another message, cataloging routes, vulnerabilities, and likely off-targets, warning that humans were no longer hunting isolated colonies. They were hunting the galaxy methodically and efficiently. The observer felt a cold certainty that when the humans chose to strike fully, there would be no hiding, no escape, no mercy. Every laugh the council had shared at the warning echoed like a curse in their mind now. The humans were no longer distant threats. They were close, adaptive, precise, unstoppable, and the galaxy would soon realize that ignoring patience, precision, and persistence was a fatal mistake, and that once humans hunted nothing, and no one would be safe again. The council chambers glimmered with lights and displays projecting the wealth and power of 1,000 worlds, but inside the observer could feel the tension rising like a storm, waiting to break. The council continued its debates about tariffs, treaties, and ceremonial duties, oblivious to the silent danger creeping across the galaxy. The observer moved through shadowed corridors, clutching the device with images of human strikes catalogued and analyzed. They tried once more to reach the council, sending encrypted messages detailing every infiltration, Every raid and every calculated strike, yet responses were delayed. Bureaucratic procedures and disbelief slowed action while humans adapted faster than any plan the Council could devise. The observer watched as ships moved along patrol routes that had been carefully calculated to avoid ambushes, yet each movement was anticipated. The humans studied fleets from orbit, observing sensor patterns, noting blind spots, recording reaction times, and learning weaknesses. They struck only when the opportunity guaranteed maximum impact and minimum risk. Each attack refined their knowledge, each disappearance sharpened their skill. The observer tried to rally fleets to counter the attacks, urging commanders to change tactics, to scatter convoys, to vary patrols, to train crews for improvisation. Yet most hesitated, fearing political repercussions or doubting the credibility of the reports. One commander whispered that humans could not be so clever, that their attacks were random and unpredictable. But the observer shook their head, showing the data patterns repeating across sectors, methods evolving. No two strikes identical, yet always effective. Humans were not bound by honor or routine. They adapted. Every failure became an opportunity to learn and strike again. They turned Council strengths into vulnerabilities, using the predictability of tradition against the galaxy itself. The observer moved from sector to sector, instructing crews on new tactics, showing how to anticipate human adaptability. Yet time was slipping away. Colonies vanished, while attention remained elsewhere. And every hesitation was a gift to the hunters. Humans did not rush, they did not panic, they studied systems and personnel. They learned habits and routines, cataloged weaknesses, and returned with precision when advantage was absolute. The Council continued to celebrate victories of diplomacy and trade, thinking the galaxy was stable and secure, while the observer knew the truth, waiting for the first fleet to vanish under human attack. The observer compiled reports of stolen supplies, sabotaged communication arrays, and captured crews, detailing how humans anticipated responses to create chaos without confrontation. Even Council's strongest fleets could be outmaneuvered using human ingenuity and patience alone. The observer felt frustration building into despair, knowing the Council had ignored the warning for too long, knowing that each laugh, each dismissal of the human threat now weighed like a stone upon the galaxy, waiting to crush it. The observer moved to the highest observation platform, watching the stars, knowing the first humans had already crossed multiple sectors, moving silently, unseen, unstoppable. And the Council still debated humans as minor annoyances, as curiosities, oblivious to the meticulous, methodical hunt unfolding around them. The observer whispered a vow to continue documenting every strike, every movement, every lesson, knowing that the humans would not wait for permission to strike, and that when they did, the Council would finally understand the cost of dismissing patience, precision, and persistence, and that by then it might already be too late. Colonies began vanishing one by one across the outer sectors. The observer tracked the incidents with grim precision, entire populations disappearing, leaving behind silent cities and drifting ships with no crews. The alarms of abandoned stations echoed through space like the ghosts of those who had fallen. The Council received reports but dismissed them as anomalies or unfortunate accidents. Yet the observer knew better. Every disappearance followed a pattern. Humans struck with calculation, selecting targets that seemed isolated yet crucial. Each attack leaving no survivors, no evidence, only fear. The observer moved from one command center to another, cataloging every anomaly, every disrupted supply line, and every unresponsive colony. The humans adapted with frightening speed, learning from each encounter, refining their tactics, their strikes, becoming faster, more precise, more devastating. They anticipated patrol patterns, predicted supply routes, and exploited the smallest mistakes. In security protocols, the observer watched a convoy of mining vessels, rerouted for safety, only to find themselves intercepted. Humans had used the diversion to trap the convoy in an unmonitored sector, stripping it of personnel and cargo before disappearing into an asteroid field. The Council debated endlessly about diplomacy and economic treaties, oblivious to the systematic destruction unfolding in the galaxy. The observer felt the weight of inevitability pressing down, knowing that by the time the Council acknowledged the human threat, entire sectors would already be lost. Survivors huddled in the remains of colonies, whispering of hunters without faces, their voices trembling as they described creatures that moved like shadows, striking silently and disappearing without trace. The observer listened and recorded every story, every detail, committing the terror and precision of humans to memory, knowing this data might be the only hope for future resistance. The humans struck again on a communication hub, disabling arrays, intercepting messages, capturing engineers and analysts to further learn the strengths and weaknesses of Council operations. Every strike refined their strategy and spread fear faster than armies could. Deploy. The Observer tried desperately to convince fleet commanders to act, to vary patrols, to abandon predictable routines, to prepare for unconventional tactics. Yet most hesitated, trusting in old protocols and underestimating the cunning and patience of humans. Humans were unlike any other species encountered in the galaxy. They did not rely on overwhelming force alone. They studied, they adapted, they waited. They struck only when guaranteed success, and then vanished before retaliation could be mounted. The Observer moved through the empty halls of command centers, listening to the hum of abandoned consoles, knowing that this silence was a warning of the destruction to come. Each colony lost, each fleet captured, was a lesson recorded by humans to improve the next strike. The Observer felt a chill as they projected a map of missing colonies, lines connecting points of attack, forming a network of calculated elimination. The Council would see these lines eventually, but by then the humans would already be among the core worlds. The Observer whispered a vow to survive, to warn, to document, to prepare for the moment when humans would no longer strike at the periphery, when they would hunt the Council itself, and the laughter of those who had dismissed warnings would finally be replaced by the realization of a relentless predator that would not stop until the galaxy learned to fear the patient, the precise, and the unstoppable. And that time was running out faster than any Council had ever imagined. Panic spread through the Council chambers like wildfire. Alarms blared across multiple sectors. Fleets scrambled to respond to attacks on worlds previously considered secure, yet humans moved faster than any defense could be mounted. The Observer watched from a hidden observation deck, heart pounding as reports poured in. Ships and colonies vanished. Fleets that had been thought invincible were intercepted and disabled before they could engage. Human forces moved with terrifying coordination, striking simultaneously on distant worlds, leaving the Council unable to react in time. Each strike was a masterclass in strategy. Humans anticipated every maneuver, every deployment, predicting responses with uncanny precision. The Council members shouted at one another, demanding explanations, blaming each other for failures, while the Observer knew the truth. Humans did not make mistakes. Humans adapted, learning from every encounter, refining their tactics. The Council attempted to mount counterattacks, sending elite fleets to intercept humans, yet each fleet returned, damaged or not at all. The Hunter had already learned how to avoid them or turn them against one another. The Observer projected images of the attacks, showing humans disabling communication hubs, rerouting transports, sabotaging defense arrays, using captured personnel to anticipate every move. The Council stared in disbelief, realizing, too late, that their arrogance had underestimated a force that did not fight like any other species. Humans did not rely on overwhelming firepower alone. They studied, they waited, they struck with precision, exploiting patterns, habits, and assumptions. The Observer moved to relay warnings to remaining colonies, urging them to hide, to scatter, to use deception. Yet panic spread faster than reason. Humans seemed to appear wherever the Council thought themselves secure. A station lost in the Vega sector. Another convoy vanished. In the Orion Belt, worlds once thriving, now silent and abandoned. The Council attempted to convene emergency summits, but every communication risked interception and sabotage. Humans had already anticipated these efforts, planting false data and misinformation to mislead defensive strategies. The Observer watched as fear took root in the Council. The realization of being hunted began to crack their composure. Leaders, who had once dismissed warnings, now stammered in disbelief, unable to reconcile their understanding of humans with the reality of destruction unfolding before them. Fleets were recalled, too late. Stations were evacuated under duress, and every delay amplified human advantage. The Observer tracked humans moving between systems, adapting to every countermeasure, learning constantly. Their methodical patience turning Council strengths into vulnerabilities. The Council tried to reorganize remaining forces, yet coordination failed. Humans struck again on multiple fronts, showing adaptability and relentless determination that no bureaucratic process could match. The Observer knew that once humans reached the core sectors, the Council would have no choice, no preparation, no hope of survival. They had laughed, dismissed, underestimated, and now panic reigned. The Council members could only watch helpless as the Hunter revealed itself across worlds simultaneously. The Observer felt a cold certainty that the galaxy was entering a new era, an era defined by a relentless pursuit, an unstoppable force, and the lesson that patience, precision, and persistence were weapons far deadlier than fleets, armies, or diplomacy. The observer stood on the highest balcony of the council citadel, staring out across the stars, a tapestry of light and darkness stretching into infinity below the city, teemed with activity, yet fear had begun to replace. Routine alarms flickered. Incessantly reports of attacks on neighboring worlds filled every channel. Fleets that had been dispatched to intercept humans were cut off or destroyed, and the council scrambled to respond, but every plan seemed inadequate. Humans had surrounded the council base, silently moving through shadows of space, striking at outlying stations, cutting supply lines, isolating worlds one by one. The observer clutched the glowing device, detailing each strike, every capture, and every retreat. The humans adapted instantly, exploiting hesitation, predicting reaction, and refining their strategy at every turn. Allies that had been counted on were falling quickly, their ships disabled, their colonies destroyed, and their personnel captured. The observer watched helplessly, knowing the first warnings they had delivered were now undeniable. Humans did not strike blindly. They studied patience and observation. Were their weapons, their attacks, relentless, precise, and unstoppable? Each moment the council hesitated allowed the humans to consolidate advantage. The observer projected images of destroyed fleets, of abandoned colonies, of captured command personnel, showing council members the reality of what they faced, but disbelief clung stubbornly to their faces, as if even the evidence could not reconcile with the scale of what humans had accomplished. The observer moved to coordinate the remaining defense systems, urging evacuation protocols, scattering vital personnel, and securing essential data. Yet even these measures seemed insufficient. The humans anticipated movement before it happened, turning every action into a potential liability, every defensive maneuver into an opportunity for advantage. Communications flickered with intercepted messages, manipulated to mislead fleets and disrupt coordination. The observer knew the council had underestimated the humans, and now it was too late. The laughter of those who had dismissed the warnings echoed in memory as a cruel reminder of hubris. As the stars themselves seemed to tremble with the presence of the hunter, humans, struck with neither emotion nor hesitation, they were unstoppable, efficient, and adaptive, and the council could only react as one by one their worlds and allies fell. The observer could see the desperation mounting in the eyes of leaders who had once considered themselves masters of the galaxy. The observer felt a cold determination to survive, to document, to witness the downfall, and the relentless precision of humans whose patience had been underestimated. Every second the humans waited amplified fear, and ensured that when they struck there would be no mercy and no escape. Colonies that had been considered secure were lost, fleets that had been trusted were destroyed. Humans moved as shadows, unseen yet undeniable. The observer whispered a vow to remain vigilant, to track every movement, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that when humans finally reached the council citadel there would be no hiding, no negotiation, no reprieve. The hunter had surrounded them. The lesson of underestimating persistence, patience, and precision was about to be taught, and the council would finally understand the cost of laughter, the cost of dismissal, and the unstoppable force that humans had become. Across the stars, silence and fear spread as the observer watched allies fall one by one, every attack a lesson learned, every movement catalogued, and the galaxy poised on the edge of a reckoning. It could no longer escape. The council chamber was no longer a place of debate or ceremony. It was filled with tension and dread. The observer watched from the shadows as leaders who had once dismissed warnings now trembled at every report. Alarms echoed through the halls. Signals of fleets destroyed, colonies lost, and communication arrays disabled filled every screen. The humans had reached the core systems, moving silently, methodically, unstoppable. Every defensive plan had been anticipated, every strategy countered. The observer felt a cold clarity, knowing that the laughter of the past had become a cruel memory. Humans did not require grand displays of force. They moved like shadows, slipping through defenses, striking with precision, and vanishing before retaliation could be mounted. Fleets vanished under stealth attacks. Stations were captured or destroyed, and entire populations were taken or eliminated. Humans adapted instantly, learning from every council maneuver, every defensive protocol, and every miscalculation. The council scrambled to respond, sending elite fleets to intercept, but each movement was predicted and exploited by humans who turned council strengths into vulnerabilities. The observer projected maps of human strikes, every line connecting vanished worlds, every mark a testament to relentless precision, showing that humans had studied patience and persistence had been their most powerful weapons. The council realized, too late, that dismissing warnings had given humans the time they needed to learn to adapt and to dominate the galaxy. Their arrogance had become their undoing. The observer moved among the remaining personnel, organizing evacuation of key assets, securing critical data, and preparing what defenses remained. But even these actions were shadows against the unstoppable force approaching the citadel. Humans arrived, silently disabling outer defenses, capturing command personnel, and cutting communications. No strategy could evade their adaptation. Every move countered, every contingency anticipated. The observer could only record and react, documenting the precision, the patience, the relentlessness that defined the humans who hunted them. Humans had learned the habits, the routines, the weaknesses of the council, and were now exploiting them with surgical efficiency. The observer whispered a vow to survive, to witness, to catalog every strike, knowing that the galaxy would never forget this lesson, that patience, precision, and persistence were weapons deadlier than any fleet or army. Every council member felt the weight of inevitability pressing down, their former laughter replaced by fear, their dismissals replaced by horror. The observer saw worlds burning in orbit, fleets drifting empty through space stations, abandoned in silence. The humans did not rest, they did not hesitate, they moved like a storm, calculated and unyielding, and the council understood at last the cost of underestimation, the lesson of hubris, and the unstoppable force they had ignored. For so long, the observer watched as humans systematically hunted the remaining leaders, capturing or eliminating resistance one by one. The galaxy trembled under their presence. The council, who had once believed themselves untouchable, now faced annihilation, with only the observer remaining to witness the final reckoning. The hunter was complete. The galaxy had learned too late that even the smallest underestimated predator could become the deadliest force, and that humans would hunt without mercy, without pause, and without end. Their patience, their precision, and their persistence had won the day, and the lesson would echo through the stars forever.